Today's guest is the amazing Rand Fishkin, the co-founder of SparkToro, the founder of Moz, and also the co-founder of Inbound.org, which later sold to HubSpot. Here's what Rand and I talked about: the fable of the pizzeria and all the ways in which marketing attribution is broken, how SparkToro is bringing a new level of audience research to marketers everywhere, and finally, Rand's very sage advice on how best to optimize your marketing mix. So let's get into it. All right, Rand, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. I'm super excited because I have this fun story that I'm going to start with. It was 2 years ago, and I was following you on Twitter, and you had this tweet, a video tweet, about the parable of the pizzeria. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. It was right around the time when my co-founder and I were thinking about what we wanted to do next. We were at a company at that time, and we're like, we want to start a business, and the timing couldn't have been perfect because it was very relevant to what were the ideas that we had in our head about marketing. So I want to start with, can you tell our audience about what that story
Sure.
is? What is that parable of the pizzeria?
Yeah. So, all right, here goes. This is the story about a woman in Milan, and she runs a pizzeria. She sells whatever traditional Neapolitan style pizzas, and she feels like business is a little slow. She thinks, I could get more customers. So what does she do? Well, she's very traditional in her marketing approaches. She hires 3 neighborhood scamps to pass out flyers, and the flyers, each one is a different color, and each one has a different discount code on it, but they're all for the same discount. It's like buy one pizza, get one free. And she sends these neighborhood scamps out to go distribute the flyers all over town. At the end of the month, she looks and she sees that the kid with the green flyer is way outpacing his peers. He's just crushing it. In fact, more than half of the restaurants' new customers are coming in with the green flyer. The other 2 don't even add up to 15%. She's like, great. She fires the other 2 kids. She keeps the kid with the green flyer. 6 months later, she goes and talks to her accountant. The accountant says, well, business is up slightly. We're up about, 10% in terms of overall customers. But because the discount code is being used by so many customers, such a huge proportion of your customers are using it, revenue is actually down a little bit. And the woman who runs the pizzeria thinks, oh my God, this is impossible. How can this possibly be? I know tons of people are coming in with the green flyer. I don't understand it. So what does she do? Next day, she puts on a disguise. She follows the kid out of the pizzeria, and she watches what he does. And what does he do with it? The kid takes his stack of green flyers. He walks out of the pizzeria, and then he ducks into an alleyway around the corner from the pizzeria, and he's just waiting there. The woman's watching, and anytime someone looks like they're walking toward or into the pizzeria, the kid jumps out and hands them the green flyer. Because why would you work hard to make more sales when you can just take credit for sales that were already going to happen? AKA Google and Facebook's motto.
Love it. This is gonna get a lot of interest, so I'm excited about it. But in a serious tone, right? I think I completely agree with the way you tell the story. It makes complete sense to me. It's all about finding people who would not have come to that pizzeria, on their own. And how do you do that is ultimately the goal of marketing. So,
not if you're Google, right?
Yeah.
If you're Google, the goal of marketing is let's take credit for sales that were already going to happen because we know where everyone on the internet is going before they come to your website, right? The data that Google and Facebook have, because their pixels are on every website, because their analytics are on every website, they know every customer journey from first impression to life, all the clicks and travails and investigation that they might do. And so they leverage this data internally to sell more advertising by taking credit for more of the sales that would have happened anyway. And Pranav, this to me is the important point. The important point is if you are running a large amount of paid or performance advertising or even brand advertising, and you haven't tested shutting it off for a couple months, a quarter, 6 months, you don't know what the real impact is. You don't know what the lift is. In too many CMOs, too many VPs of marketing, too many agencies are scared. They're scared to lose that 5 or 10% of growth that's costing them the equivalent of, half of their marketing dollars, way more than they should be spending. They're scared to get creative. They're scared to think outside the Google and Facebook marketing duopoly. It's Apple and Amazon as well, depending on what we're talking about. And I just want to encourage marketers.
It's a shame. I agree.
Yeah, I want to encourage marketers to think more broadly.
I love it. And I love what you said, right? Which is test it, experiment with it. That is ultimately the scientific method, right? We should be applying that to everything that we do when it's possible. And to your point, it is very possible to run these types of tests where even if you're not shutting it off entirely, shut it off in a region, see what that does, right? And that's become sort of the common, I would say, for a lot of modern teams, that has become the standard way that they're operating now, which is testing in certain geographies before they make decisions at a national level to prove the case out to both the CMO and the CFO, like, hey, it's working or it's not working, right? So
I think
interesting.
There's a unfortunately, small subset of marketers who do this and do it well and do it consistently. And then there's a huge group of people who just throw dollars at these companies. And I have empathy for them, right? I think that it's really hard to go into a meeting and say, well, look, I know the analytics data and the advertising data and the performance data all show that these customers who bought from us were exposed to this many ads on Google, this many ads on Facebook, the click-through percentages are these things. But I think a whole bunch of them would have purchased anyway. Man, that is a hard sell. It's really tough to get buy-in on that. And I think this is why you see Google's ad dollars, skyrocketing.
Yeah. What's really interesting is, and I'm curious to get your take. So both Google and Meta and pretty much every large advertising platform in the last 5 years has come up with other ways of measuring media. So Google has now an open source tool for this thing called marketing mix modeling. They actually published a whole bunch of papers around incrementality testing, right? And we're in that business, so we'll talk about it. So go soft on me a little bit. I'm curious to hear your take. Meta's done the same thing, right? They've got an open source model. Amazon actually released an MMM solution for e-commerce and D2C vendors on their platform. Uber surprisingly has an open source library to do a whole bunch of stuff, which is interesting.
No, I didn't know about that.
And there's a couple of other like open source stuff that's happening in the community. So a lot of it in Europe actually, which is really fascinating. Maybe not because of GDPR and all the privacy sort of implications. So I'm curious, like, and literally there's a paper from Google that says, don't just look at touch-based attribution, look at marketing mix modeling, look at incrementality testing, look at your touch-based attribution and look at it holistically. But not everybody knows about this. Like it doesn't go on the Google homepage, obviously. Right. But I'm curious, like, what your take is on this, like, broader ecosystem of measurement.
Yeah. So let's see. When it comes to econometrics and marketing mix modeling, and which is, for folks who are not familiar, this is essentially the process of trying to take all the channels and touch points that influence a buyer journey, right, or potentially influence a buyer journey. Measure all of them together, right? So like hey, we got this PR exposure in the Washington Post, someone wrote an article about us, someone mentioned us on this YouTube channel, there was a podcast about us, there was a bunch of people talking about us on LinkedIn, we were at this conference or event, and then we also bought all this performance or brand advertising online. And which of those things, in which quantities and how much, if we were to model them out, and some of them use more simplistic algorithms, some of them use machine learning, some of them claim to use full-on AI, which I think is just machine learning. Yes. But anyway,
that's right.
The whole goal of this is essentially to reverse engineer which channels, which tactics had what % of impact on your total addressable market of sales and marketing. And I think, Pranav, that it is reasonable if you are attempting to use econometrics for your advertising spend, and you're spending upwards of, let's say, $5 or $10 million a month. Then I think it is very reasonable to apply those tactics, because it doesn't have to be perfect, right? If it's directionally accurate, you can still get a lot of data out of it. Is it reasonable if you're talking to a SaaS entrepreneur who's doing $2 million in revenue and spending $10K a month on Google? Hell no. No way. Like, you can't do it. And is it reasonable to say, oh yeah, the econometrics model can take into account social media, and it can take into account content, and it can take into account PR and word of mouth? Hell no. It pretends to do a little bit of that, but no way. That mention on that YouTube channel, this podcast, no econometrics model I've ever seen can say, oh, well, Rand was on The Marketing Scientist, and that influenced a whole bunch of people to go over to SparkToro over the course of the next 60 days and, try out the free version of the product. Nope, never going to see it. It's not going to be in there. You know who's going to get the credit? Google. Why is Google going to get the credit? Because what will happen is people will not go to their browser and type in sparktoro.com. They will go to their browser and type in SparkToro, and that will go to Google's search engine, which will show as a branded search. And Google loves to take credit for branded search, which is a huge portion. Navigation is a huge portion of Google's overall search volume. And that's going to show up in the econometrics model as you should be spending more on your Google search advertising. So,
that's it. Yeah. No, it's a good point, right? So I think I completely agree with you on the point about if you have 2 months of data, or even a year of data, and you're spending $10K a month, you don't need all this.
And it's not going to work,
right? It's not going to work, but also you don't need it. I think the better way to do that, right? The better thing to do there is actually take the testing approach. Because if you're taking the testing approach and I'll give you an example, right? You're running those Google ads, and I'm just making this up, just in California, but don't run it in New York, and then see what happens in New York and California. You have much easier and clearer ways to see the impact, which I completely agree with. And I think the point about...
I was just going to say, on that testing front, sometimes it's impossible to do geographically, especially with organic.
Yes.
So for example, let's say that you want to test a strategy of being very active at conferences and events, and in content marketing and in social media marketing. My advice there, if you want to test, is you can't reasonably do it geographically. And so you should do it cohort by cohort. So let's say, for example, that one of your cohorts is, hey, we serve trademark and patent attorneys. And one is we serve educators at law schools. And these are two different audiences. And so my advice would be, make all your content for the trademark and patent attorneys and see how that's landing. And then a few months later, make all your content for the law schools and do all your, social media marketing to them and your outreach and whatever.
Love it.
And see how those land with those two different groups and what's effective and, how much you're spending, all that kind of stuff. Because you can get an insight. It won't be perfect, but you can get insight about what's working and not.
100% agree. We like to call that time-based testing, which is basically just saying, right, you're doing it in periods of time. And I also add something to that, which is change the level of investment that you're making over time. So if you're doing one blog post a week and 3 LinkedIns, try to vary that up a little bit. And next month, try to vary that up again. And you're trying to see if that's sort of reaching more people in your audience. And therefore, is that having an impact on your Google search query volume for your brand, right? And you're able to see whether there's a correlation between the two moving in the same direction or not.
No, my man.
I'm putting all this stuff out, but nothing's happening.
It blows my mind. It blows my mind how few entrepreneurs and founders and even sophisticated marketers go look at how essentially what my colleague Amanda Natividad named zero-click marketing and zero-click content, how that influences branded search and how that branded search leads to whatever, free trials or use of the free product or signups or conversions or literal sales from an e-commerce cart. That's not that hard to measure. And you can see that lift over time. yeah, it's kind of like going back to the 20th century, right? Like that's how they,
It totally
yeah, that's how
is.
they did
It
it.
totally is. Yep. And that's the fun part about econometrics, right? Everyone talks about, oh, it's happening because of ML and AI. And I buy into some of the ML part. There's no AI, it's ML. Let's just be real. Um, there might be some interpretation of the data through Gen AI. Okay, sure. But like the
Right.
core
Yeah.
tech is ML. And the concepts that we're talking about were invented in the 70s and the 80s by P&G that had no digital, right? They had newspapers and they had radio and they had TV and they had to do the exact same thing. Should I put an ad in the newspaper? Should I put an ad in the TV and measure my actual sales in that region and then make the correlations? It was the exact same
Yep.
thing. So sometimes the old is new again, and I love it. I'm here for
I mean,
it.
a big part of the reason this old is new again is because of the loss of attribution data that sort of a combination of things, right? So privacy laws and regulations have impacted that. Adoption of ad blockers have impacted that. Changes to the analytics platform have impacted that. Google and Bing and the search engines deciding not to send you the keyword data in organic have impacted that. Dark social, which is a huge proportion of all the social referrals that you might see, has impacted that, and zero click has impacted that, right? The
Yep.
rise of zero click platforms. So all these things
Totally with you.
mean you kind of got to go back in time to know how to measure your marketing investments. Okay, so wait,
Yep.
Pranav, I'm really curious. I don't know if I'm supposed to ask you questions, but I'm really curious.
Go for it. Please do.
After you heard this parable of the pizzeria, like what did you and your co-founder get up to, or what was the?
What happened? Yeah, so this was, late 2022, and we were, my hypothesis on marketing was that, and tell me if you agree or disagree on this, the average marketing technology software has not been great, in my opinion. And I felt very sad as a marketer that, product people get these amazing pieces of software, engineers get these amazing pieces of software, salespeople get these amazing pieces of software, I would argue. And marketers are always sort of a level below. There's a lot of broken promises. There's a lot of, marketers are good at marketing. So we do a good job of like making the promise, but we don't always deliver. And so I went and talked to like hundreds of, VPs of marketing and CMOs. And I kid you not, the number one question that still came back is, how do I better communicate with my finance team about when I invest $1 into marketing, what am I getting on the other side? And it's top of mind for them. It's top of mind, but there's a communication gap between marketing and finance. And that became really interesting to us. So we are all about solving that communication gap. Now we'll talk about the how, but I won't bore the audience with that. It'll sound like a sales pitch. But that's that. We built a company and we've been at it. We're 3 people. We're venture backed, unlike you guys. So we went to the dark side. But we're having a lot of fun. We have some early customers, all that fun stuff.
Love it. Yeah, that's great stuff. My one piece of advice, unsolicited, on the venture side, the thing that I did not realize when I was a venture backed company is that while you're going to get pushes and nudges to grow quickly and spend fast to get that growth, my advice would be take the money and then just stay profitable, because you can't be killed. And they, very frankly, they might hem and haw in board meetings about how you should be spending more and raising your next round and getting the metrics, but you don't have to do that. Depending on your docs, usually you have control.
Oh, absolutely. You are 100% right. And I wouldn't do anything differently. We are building this company on a very singular focus of sustainable growth, not just for ourselves, but also for our customers. That's the whole point, right? Because if you spend all this money as a CFO, you're going, well, where's my return? At the end of the day, this is a business and it needs to generate cash flow. Forget about EBITDA. It needs to generate cash flow. And so, one of the benefits of having been in the industry for 15 years, having seen public companies and private companies, and having seen engineering, product, and marketing, we have a very holistic way of thinking about business building.
Yeah, love that.
Now, Does it work? Does it not work? Who knows? But that's absolutely the value that we stand by.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to bring the conversation back to SparkToro,
Sure.
because I was personally super excited about what you all were building, and I continue to be very excited. I go to the website and I'm always like figuring out, okay, how can I better use this to inform our own marketing strategy and listening to what's happening on the internet. That's how I describe it, is listening to what's happening on the internet. But tell us in your words why you started SparkToro and what is the gap in the universe that it fills.
Yeah, I mean, my big frustration was that there was no high quality, data-driven way to get answers to key questions that marketers and entrepreneurs and creators ask themselves all the time, like, where can I find my audience on the internet that's not just Google and Meta or Apple and Amazon, right? Like outside of these big platforms and their advertising ecosystems, where can I go to reach CMOs or VPs of marketing or trademark attorneys or people who do lighting design in California? and the answers to those questions historically have basically been surveys and interviews. That's the only way to reach them, right? If you are a product creator or you're a marketer and you want to reach interior designers who focus on lighting design in Los Angeles, go find 10 of them, interview them, try and get a survey that, maybe you pay a market research firm to do a survey to 500 of them, maybe 20 of those will answer, and then you use those things to inform yourself. And very frankly, Pranav, the questions that you really want answers to, like which YouTube channels do they subscribe to? Which podcasts are they downloading every week? What websites do they visit? Which social accounts do they follow? What are words and phrases they use to describe themselves? Which schools did they go to? All those things which tie directly to how you might do marketing, how you might do product, how you might do overall company strategy. Those questions are terrible for surveys. Like, it's just impossible to ask someone reasonably in a survey, list 5 YouTube channels that you subscribe to about interior design. Like, you're going to get bad answers. It's going to have recency bias. It's going to have popularity bias. It's not going to be reflective. What you really want to do is learn lockpicking, get all your audience's home addresses, and then you want to go to their house and break in and steal their phone, get their phone's unlock code, and then go look at the things that they actually listen to, watch, read, subscribe to, follow, search for, etc. This, of course, highly unethical and extremely illegal. I recommend it to no one. But the next best thing you can do, because a ton of this data is out there in the universe, is you can essentially crawl, index, buy, aggregate that data, and then serve it up to people. And that's what Casey and I wanted to do. We were like, oh my God, we can answer all these questions for marketers if we just acquire this data and put it together in the right kinds of ways. And so this is what SparkToro does. We work with a company called Datos, which has a large clickstream panel in the United States, about 10 million devices, a little more than that. And every URL that they visit, right? So it knows words that they search for and sees all the web pages that they visit. It, of course, is disconnected from any personalizable data. So we don't try and say like, oh, here's Pranav and he visited these sites. Like, no, It doesn't even say whether you're, it doesn't say gender or race or age or geography or anything like that. It's just these anonymized URL patterns. But we then, because that's already anonymized, we tie that to LinkedIn profiles. We have about 300 million of those, not all of them in the US, obviously. And then we've got a big collection of what ranks in Google for all of these search terms and the keywords that people search for. And then we have social data on top of that. So like crawled social profiles. And we basically link these together. That would be a long explanation on the how of linking together, but a lot of it is affinity and fuzzy matching, not direct matching. But then we can tell you, if you search for interior designers Los Angeles, we can be like, here are the YouTube channels that they listen to. Here are the podcasts that they download. Here are the websites that they visit. Here are the social accounts that they follow. Here's the words and phrases they use to describe themselves. Here's the keywords that they search for. And that data, it should be in every marketer's hands, right? So that was kind of our
Yep.
like the problem we wanted to solve.
That's amazing. And I've already found it really interesting. So I logged into SparkToro this morning right before this podcast to kind of prepare a little bit, and the keyword that I searched for was attribution. I want to see, okay, what's happening with attribution, right? That's a pretty good one. And it immediately showed me the top, you can immediately see who the top vendors are, what they're, seeing. The top YouTube channels was fascinating to me. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The podcast was really interesting because now I can go and reach out to those podcasts and those YouTube channels for, hey, should we do something together, right? Because that's the space that we play in. So it was
hot
super
tip for you.
impactful.
If you see people with sizable audiences, so either like social accounts or people who run podcasts or people who run YouTube channels, invite them as guests.
Yeah.
Because they bring their audiences
That's right.
with them, right? And so then if you want to, it says here like Joe Polizzi is someone who a lot of people who are interested in attribution follow. Joe doesn't himself talk about attribution, but if you have him on the podcast to talk about like Content Marketing Institute and what he's doing with creators, he will bring his audience with him. And so then you know this stuff.
It makes complete sense. Yeah, no. And so I'm really pumped about using it more as, we spent the last 7 months just kind of getting our first few customers and making them happy. And we just revamped our website. And now I'm like getting out there and, launching this podcast. We'll have the first 5 episodes go out next week. So now I'm ready to kind of invest in SparkToro and go like, okay, let's double down and figure out where people are on the internet, what they're doing. And it's a lot of fun. Okay. And I loved a couple of things that you mentioned in your description. One, your transparency with where you're getting the data from and how you're doing the matching. We love that. We take the same approach. So we've taken an open source approach to all marketing measurement, which means you can literally look at the code that we're using for econometrics or for incrementality testing, and we're not hiding anything. We're showing you the uncertainty in the data. We're showing you that we actually don't have data about word of mouth, right? So please don't take it at face value and just run with it. Please also use your brain to apply intuition and your 20 years of human LLMs to figure out what's
basically
what's
the opposite of Google
data.
advertising pitch, which is don't use your brain, just trust us, sign up for Google's automated advertising systems.
I have a frenemy relationship with every ad network, right? Because the way I think about that is obviously there's gaps in what those ad platforms have been able to provide. And I will say, we hang out in Google Ads and Meta Ads, and I know we're going on a tangent here, but I'll come back to this. The UX needs such massive improvements in those platforms. It's pretty crazy. But coming back to what you were saying about, SparkToro, love the transparency, love the PII free approach, right? There's no personally identifiable information. Nope. We take the same approach. We killed all cookies in our website for the same reason. Like, we don't want anybody to
Interesting.
Yep, we just kick all cookies gone. So I don't have GA. We don't have any intent signals, none of that, which is kind of crazy, but we did it. And then I love the idea of affinity. Talk to us about that. How do you all figure out affinity between all of the different things that you have in your database?
Sure. Yeah. So the rough way to think about it, or the sort of basic way to think about it, is affinity is for us a score between a 0 and 100 that we calculate that says this is the overlap between the group you've searched for and the behavior that we're describing. So for example, on that search you performed where you were looking for people who search for the word attribution in Google, and it says, in the podcast data that Joe Polizzi's Content Inc. has a 23 out of 100. That it's not specifying a particular percent. It's not saying 23% of all people who search for attribution listen to Joe Polizzi's podcast. It's saying that as compared to marketing profs, which is a 24, it is very slightly, the odds are that slightly fewer people in this audience listen to this one. And then, as compared to, say, the Talks at Google podcast, which is a little bit broader. It includes not just advertising and analytics, but all sorts of search and research stuff. So that Talks at Google podcast says it has a 12 affinity, which is about half as much. And so you could reasonably anticipate that about half as many people in the audience, in the attribution searching audience, listen to Talks at Google. The reason it's not percentage is because this requires multiple connections between data, right? The podcast doesn't just look at, oh, we have all the people who searched for it, and then we just look at their behavior with the podcast. No, we'll actually look at, here's all the people who searched for podcast, and then what other attributes does this audience have? And of those attributes that they have, what sort of groups of them are interested in these podcasts? So we're broadening it out and then applying these individual sources of influence to it. And so the affinity score, rather than like a percent of audience calculation, makes way more sense. And we try and keep it just simple and logical. So if you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, well, Gartner Talent Angle has moderate affinity with this audience, but behind the numbers at eMarketer has more considerable affinity with this audience.
Right. I think back to your point about precision is not what is required here. It's the relative ranking, which I think is more interesting.
Yeah.
And
I mean, precision would
that's
be
also true for measurement.
Precision would be nice to have. Like, I agree, it would be great, but then it couldn't apply as universally to the data, right? Because there's groups that are so small on the internet that if we didn't sort of expand and say, oh, well, they have these other attributes about them, and then let's go look at the overlap between those attributes and these sources of influence, we just couldn't give you decent data. And so that expansion has to happen, because it's not like we can monitor every single human being on the internet. Lighting designers in Los Angeles, like, how many of them even listen to podcasts? There's probably a few hundred total. And there's no way that SparkToro or Datos, right, our clickstream provider, could have every one of those in their panel. So there you go.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to ask you a tough question here. You've been doing this for a few years. You guys are bootstrapped. I think you raised it around, but you raised it from friends and family, and then you paid it back. That was an interesting one. How do you think about the next 5 or 10 years? What does SparkToro look like in a longer term horizon?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to disagree with several things you said. First off, this is an easy question.
Love it.
Second, we didn't bootstrap. I want to be clear. I did not have the money. Casey didn't have the money to get this off the ground ourselves. We raised not from friends and family, but sort of from my professional network. So lots of people, probably a lot of people like yourself who, ran startups or worked in marketing tech, worked at agencies. A lot of agency owners invested in SparkToro because they were like, I need this for my agency.
Nice.
So hell yeah, I want to invest in that thing. We raised 1.3 million from 35 angels, which is similar to like a seed or Series A, maybe probably closer to what a traditional VC would call a seed round. But we never planned to raise any more money. Our goal essentially was repay our investors and then every few years pay dividends on the profits. So long-term profitable operation, hopefully for, fingers crossed, knock on wood, decades to come. That would be our plan. We want to see this company exist for a long time, solve this problem for a long time, help people out, and be reliable. I think the thing, one of the things that frustrates me about the venture sphere a lot is that if you look at the 7-year survival rate of a venture invested in startup, it is less than 1/3 the rate of the average restaurant in the United States. And restaurants have a terrible closure rate, right? So approximately a little under 9%, I think, of venture invested in startups will exist after 7 years. So if you've raised one round from an institutional investor and you make it to 7 years, you're among a very elite group, like just surviving.
Yeah.
If you want to beat your investors' expected rate of return over a 10-year or 7 to 10 year time horizon, which is most of them, it's 0.9% of venture-backed startups that beat their investors' expected rate of return, which is just pathetic. And so, my big goal here after Moz, right, which was my first startup and which made a ton of money, right? It was a $50 million a year startup with like 85% margins, but it also raised a lot of money, raised $29 million over 3 rounds. And so when it finally sold after kind of plateauing for the last couple of years, I had left the company at that point, but it was very disappointing for everyone. Very disappointing for everyone. And
I can understand that.
I don't want, what I want to do with my whole career is make reasonable promises. Like if Pranav, if someday I ever come to you and I'm like, hey, you've had a ton of success and blah, blah, would you ever want to invest in my next thing? I want you to feel like I can rely on Rand to tell me he's going to do a thing and then do it. Not, well, there's a 1 in 100 chance that if I tell Rand, that if Rand tells me he's going to do this thing, he'll do it. And I just need to bet on 100 Rands. And like, no, I want that confidence of future.
Totally.
So, what SparkToro is going to keep trying to solve this problem better and better. That's our goal. Help more customers, build up a hopefully lovely community of people around us. We're doing our first in-person event this year and doing a little more community investment. We might be hiring.
Do you want to give a shout out? When is the event and where can people sign up?
Oh yeah. Conveniently, there's a wait list. Depending on when this episode goes out, the wait list may be full, but there'll be ticket sales. It's called Spark Together. So if you go to Google and search for Spark Together, I'll never be able to attribute that to this podcast, but
you might be able to time it with the launch of the date. So when we launch the podcast, our audience is good, but like I don't know if it'll be showing up
exactly. Yeah, GA. And this is generally speaking. I mean, for anyone who invests in what I'd call like digital PR more broadly, right? Like just being out there, having conversations, getting on YouTube channels, doing webinars, doing podcasts, all that kind of stuff. I would urge you not to look at only the spike, the day of spike. I would tell you, I'm sure you would coach folks as well, right? What you want to look at is we did a 6-month, investment into being on a lot of other people's, events and podcasts and webinars, and we did conferences, whatever. Let's look at the next 6 months or the next 12 months. Was that lift higher than when we took our foot off that gas pedal and put it on the content creation gas pedal, whatever it is. But I was going to say,
I'll tell you. Yeah, so tell us about the event. Yeah, Spark Together.
It is
October, right?
October 8th in Seattle.
Nice. Okay, I got to get on that wait list. That'll be fun. Okay, so does everybody use SparkToro? Is it, individual marketers? Is it agencies? Is it like who should go and use it? Everybody?
I would say as a marketer who is a thoughtful founder and entrepreneur, if you build for everybody, you're going to have a bad time. That being said, anybody who has the problem SparkToro solves, I would urge you to go check it out. The nice thing that we do that I think, is part of our just ethos is you don't need to enter a credit card. There's no free trial. It's a free service. And then if you like the data and want more of it, you can pay and sort of get more data. But you can go and explore the product. And for a lot of early stage entrepreneurs and founders and even marketers, they get a lot of value out of just the free search, right? So they'll do a couple searches for people in their audience,
right,
people with the behaviors they're going after, their website, whatever, a competitor's website. And they'll be like, oh, dang, yeah, the 50 things that I got out of the product for free are going to give me 6 months of work anyway. And then if I need anything else, I'll come back to it. Or if I need a deeper report or I need to present it to my boss, or I'm an agency and I have customers, great, you can sign up for the free version or the paid version. But it's also very affordable. So there is, I was going to say, Pranav, there's not a lot of people who do this, but one company out of the UK called Brandwatch offers a enterprise grade sort of version of what SparkToro does. Not exactly. It's awesome. I played around with it. I was like, this is killer. It's amazing. It's also talk to a salesperson and spend tens of thousands of dollars a year at least. And we were like,
Right.
this should be for everybody, right? Like you should be able to do it for free, and you should be able to spend like $100, $150 and get like all the data you want. And that's sort of our goal. So we have a weird business model. Our churn rate is insanely high. Like no venture investor would ever look twice at us, which is kind of great. Because we also have an incredibly high recidivism rate. So every month, 15 to 20% of our customers are people who've been customers before, which I think speaks volumes to SparkToro is really valuable. Even if you only subscribe for a month, use the product, quit, come back 6 months later or a year later or 2 years later, you join a new job, you got, have a new client, you've got a new project. You're like, oh, I need that data again. And you come back to us. And so we think about lifetime value really differently from an average venture SaaS business. We think about it as over the course of 10 years, how many months might someone subscribe for on and off, rather than what's one subscription period.
I love this. This is amazing because it's paying as like the payment plan is aligned with the customer value rather than an arbitrary construct of what needs to go on a P&L to make the numbers look good. And if there's so many companies who make it harder to quit or lock you into a 1-year plan and all that fun stuff. And, fun story here, when we launched, we had annual plans.
Yeah.
And we were doing some pilots to kind of get, feedback early on and so on and so forth. And that was an easy way, like people could try it before they have an annual plan. And then we had this aha moment of like, we should just let people pay monthly. Like, if they want to pay monthly, let them pay monthly. So if we do our job right, they'll want to keep paying every month, and that's how it should be. So we've changed some things.
Yeah,
So
we do the thing
very much in the same boat as you are.
We did the thing. It's getting a little more common, which I sort of love, but we do this thing where we email someone 3 days before we're about to charge their card again and say like, hey, if you're not using the product, now's the time to quit. Like, don't let us charge you and subscribe. I know this is a weird email to get. Most of your subscriptions are not going to send you this email because they really want you to stick around. But SparkToro is not like that. We want you to just be delighted. And so, and come back to us in the future, right? And I think that trust building exercise is just really different. It's just it's a totally different vibe because we're a company who hopes to be around for a long time. And so we have to build up that trust with every one of our customers, as opposed to sort of like, in venture world, I know for so many entrepreneurs, this is really hard. Like they have to get the metrics this month, next month, to be able to show their raise their next round, because otherwise it's all over for them. And so your real customer is your investors, not your subscribers, buyers.
Customers. Yeah. Okay, so I have one last question before we wrap up here. You built Moz from nothing to the exit. You're now building SparkToro. You know a ton about marketing and online and digital and everything else. If you were to advise a CMO or a VP of marketing about where or how you would think about placing your investments from a SEO, content perspective, and I'm being vague to give you some freedom to describe it the way you would describe it, what would you say in today's day and age? What should people be, especially with all the AI stuff that's happening? Like, where should people invest?
Okay, so I'm going to say two things. One, anyone who gives you an answer that is everyone should prioritize X and then Y and then Z is wrong. Absolutely everyone, because there are no two sectors, and even inside a sector, there are no two companies that should prioritize the same mix of marketing channels and tactics and even strategy. That's a recipe for sameness and mediocrity and being overwhelmed by ad prices and competition. You have to be unique. You have to choose, just as you need a unique value proposition for your product, you want a unique marketing mix for your delivery of your message, what your message is, who it's reaching, why it's compelling to them. That cannot come from a generic answer to that kind of question. So that is one thing. When it comes to AI, I think AI can do some very awesome things. It is powerful. I have used it, even though I'm a little bit more of an AI skeptic than most people. Like, I think it is going to be transformative in the way that spreadsheets and Microsoft Excel was transformative in the 80s, not in the way that the internet was transformative in the 90s. That's my broad brushstroke there. But I would say, if you are considering, what do we need to do in terms of AI adoption? I would start with the most important problems your business needs to solve. And then I would ask the question, is AI the best solution to the most important problems? Generally speaking, I would not, unless you're sort of, for some agency owners and consultants, and a few in-house people, depending on their role, it might be valuable to be like, I want to learn all the things AI can do and like get really familiar with all the tools and try and become an AI expert. I get that's true for a few people. For 99% of people, you should go down your list of most important problems and then ask if AI is the best, an AI-powered thing is the best solution to that problem. And if it's not, it's okay not to adopt right away. It really is. You can wait until whatever technology changes are getting there. Here's my big concern. My big concern is that people treat AI like they treated mobile apps in like 2010, where every single website thought it needed a mobile app. And what 99% of websites needed was a good mobile website experience. I also worry that it's going to be like NFTs and crypto and blockchain, where it's just this like, why did we spend 3 years and $10 million investing in like, a better homes and garden NFT program for gardeners? What? So, are there uses? Definitely. Should you only apply them to the biggest problems that you're having when it makes the most sense? Absolutely.
All right. What a wonderful answer. Okay. So everyone, go to SparkToro.com, do your free sign up, go to Spark Together, search for that on Google, and sign up for the waitlist. And Rand, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. I've loved it. And hopefully we'll do it again in a few months or next year and see where SparkToro is in its journey to solve the audience research problem.
Back at you. I would love to see what you guys are doing with sort of savvy, thoughtful econometrics applied in fair open source ways. That sounds quite beautiful to me. And I hope I get to learn more about the product as it makes progress. So best of luck to you.
Thank you, sir. Well, there you go, folks. That was Rand Fishkin from SparkToro. Highly recommend you go check it out. We'll have many more fun and insightful conversations, so tune in again next week. See you then.